Okay, so my name is Reed. I am here finally after a circuitous route through the design industry. I think like many of us, I started in print design years ago and worked my way through small agencies. I did some freelance, I taught classes, and I worked at Huge in Brooklyn for a couple of very excellent years. I love Brooklyn. And now I work at Google. About 2 years ago, I moved to Seattle to be the caretaker of the design spec for the Google Cloud. If you have not used the cloud, it looks like this. It's a little grim. But what it lacks in beauty, it makes up for in like almost horrifying power. It's an extremely, extremely powerful platform, and it's a very large platform, built and maintained by a very large team. At last count, I think we had something upwards of 300 people working on it just in the UX capacity, and probably double that in engineers. So a very advanced, large, complicated beast. And I was responsible for maintaining the system that allowed people to work together efficiently on it. About 6 months ago, I changed teams. Now I work on artificial intelligence, where I continue to work on design systems. I'm building a system for intelligence. I can't show you any of this work, unfortunately. I really wish I could, because it's super fun. I also built and maintain, with my good friend Rick Love, a platform called Trivium Art History. Looks a little bit like this right now. It's changed a lot over the years. We try to share artwork from around the world. We try to broaden the discourse of art history from just the Western world to maybe a slightly bigger window on it. If you haven't been to the Guggenheim to see this show, do it. It's incredible. So let's talk about design systems. I'm sure, okay, show of hands, how many people here have used a design system or are using one right now? Yeah, it's almost everybody, right? And then how many of you have contributed to a design system or worked on the system itself? Yes, good. Okay, so lots of folks deeply invested in this space. For the sake of shared vocabulary, as any good system designer should establish, my clearest definition is a design system defines and organizes the elements and logic that make up an ecosystem to make it teachable and scalable. And they're old. Design systems emerge, I think, wherever many people have to work together over a long period of time to do something complicated. This is a spread from the 10 books of architecture by a Roman military architect named Vitruvius. It's a beautiful and old example of a design system, and it's still weirdly relevant and useful today. It follows a lot of the same rules that we apply to our digital design systems. Christopher Alexander. Architecture, I think, really dominated the design system space up until maybe the 1970s, just because it required so many people to work together. It was the perfect application for it. But then we saw the emergence of graphics standards manuals. This is how I was introduced to design systems. Transit is another place where lots and lots of people need to use a shared vocabulary. Fast forward to now, and almost everybody has a design system. Because these platforms are serving ecosystems that are like the Roman cities of old. They are massive and hopefully built to last. So what goes into a design system? This breaks down in a number of different ways. I love Alla Kolmatova's book, Design Systems, and she breaks the system down into functional and perceptual patterns, functional basically being the HTML of the individual elements, perceptual patterns being the colors and the styles and the typography that give it a unique brand voice. Brad Frost, Atomic Design, modern classic, atoms build into molecules. You wind up with functionally oriented organisms of repeatable code, which are then arranged into templates and delivered to the user as pages. It's another really nice way to break down a system. On the cloud, we sort of had to expand this model. This is the structure of the cloud design system. We surveyed our users and asked them what they need, and they responded with this lovely spread. So we have all of the typical things. We have the styles and the components and the patterns, things that would wind up in a sketch sticker sheet or code snippets, ideally. But then we also have best practices and resources and guidance around the sort of murky waters of data display. But if you look around, or if you just compare notes between yourselves, you know that there's tons and tons of things that can go into a design system. Experience models, vocabulary, voice principles. You know, if you're working on artificial intelligence, for instance, you might wind up working with voice. You might not have any UI at all, but you'll still need a system, probably. So if I was to apply my own system to design systems, it would look something like this. I think if you have these 4 things, your design system is probably headed in the right direction. Principles are, of course, the values that drive the ecosystem that you're defining. And principles get a bit of a bad rap. We'll talk about that more soon. Guidelines are the best practices, the do's and don'ts, how to start applying those values to the system. The patterns are the meat and potatoes of a design system, the componentry, the sketch sticker sheets. And then practices, I think, get the least love and might be the most important. Practices are how you keep a system alive and relevant, because a design system has to grow with the ecosystem that it serves. And the practices define how that happens. So I'm going to talk to you about 4 practices that I try to use when I'm working on design systems. And hopefully it will be useful. First, design principles should be actionable and measurable. So this is a really tricky one because design principles have to serve many masters. The Google design principles, of which there are 4, this is number 3, serve every product in the Google ecosystem. That's slides, that's the cloud, that's Gmail, that's everything. How do you get so many people to agree? Well, you keep it really simple. This is what I like to call a rallying cry principle. Everyone can agree on simple design. It makes a really good poster. But if you are trying to evaluate your work based on a principle like simple design, the question becomes simple compared to what? So, one route to take if you are dealing with vague principles is to just interpret them. So on the cloud, we take each of the Google design principles and we break them out into individual guidances that are measurable. So simple design might break down into users quickly learn how to complete tasks. Oh, and this is so good for us because cloud platforms bias towards power users. And this is a reminder not to forget the newbie. It's a good principle. And with the right benchmarking, you can absolutely test it. eBay, before their, I want to say 2017 redesign, had the principle we craft, big changes in tiny spaces and small tweaks to global ideas. It has such a nice cadence to it. Like I want to like it, but again, what global ideas are we tweaking and how? After their redesign, they rolled out a new set of principles and they evolved their old principle, which is a little vague, into original but familiar. Differentiate only in places where it really matters. Much better. Because now you've got a conversation about when you abide by best practice and standards and when you deviate. The other option, if you're dealing with tricky principles, is just to borrow heavily from others. I don't know which one of these came first, but Airbnb has the principle unified. Each piece is part of a greater whole, no isolated features or outliers. And Etsy has create unity. So I'm not suggesting that either company stole the concept of unity from the other, but it's a great practice to look around, see what other platforms' principles are, and then steal them. 2, design for quick reference and glanceability. This feels really easy, and so I almost didn't want to talk about it tonight. But I think it's a really common problem in design systems. This is the data table design spec as it appeared when I joined the cloud design system team. It's a nightmare. But it's also something that happens very, very easily because you start with something really simple, a basic table. And then every time you add functionality to it, you add something to the spec because the spec is documenting the creation. Whoa, boy. We're back. A spec documents the creation of something, but then once that object is created, you need to change the spec to be about reference. So in general, kill paragraphs like this, turn them into bullets. I don't like bullet points. You'll notice I don't use any in this presentation, but they are super good for glanceable, readable content. Walls of text, which are essential when you are documenting a component for the first time, later can be distilled down to a single image. This image actually does contain all of the same information as this business. And then if you have statefulness, just show it as an animation. Don't try to lay it out. This one should be obvious, but it just takes that extra few minutes in Photoshop and janking around with the timeline. Number 3, get painful feedback often. A design system is just like any other user experience in that it should be user tested. The cloud design system serves enough people that we put out a quarterly satisfaction survey measuring these 6 categories. And then when we get the results back, we chart them out and we break it out by user role. So designers and developers have very different needs for a design system. And so we want to make sure that we're not losing one part of our audience. You'll notice that accuracy is pretty low among designers in the pink. When you dig into this, then you get the really good salient stuff. I'm never certain if the features documented are actually available in the real components. Oh no, this is an issue of trust. You have to trust a design system, and this is a fundamental flaw we found. So our specs look like this. This is the spec page for the comparison table. And it works pretty well. I was just proud of us for getting the description down to a tight little 2 sentences, right? And turns out we were missing status because the comparison table hadn't actually been built yet. And so designers were putting it into their designs, and then engineers were getting pissed, and then designers were getting pissed, and then I was getting emails. So this is such a small change, but it made a dramatic difference, and that I think is one of the most important things when working on a design system. Sit down with the people that are going to be using it, ask them questions. A survey might be overkill, but you'll get good feedback, and it's probably going to be simple, actionable feedback, hopefully. Finally, find the souls in your system. I'm excited about this one, and this is where I'm going to get really annoyingly earnest because this is where my passion lies. In the late 17th century, there was this guy named Gottfried Leibniz. You might know him as the second person to invent differential calculus after Newton. I'm a historian, by the way, so I'm gonna belabor you with a little history right now. Please be patient with me. So Leibniz was also interested in this idea called the theory of substantial form, which, to badly paraphrase, means that every element in the world, a water glass, a tree, has a unique purpose, an intention. And he called that purpose its soul. So the soul of a water glass is to keep me from getting too thirsty. And it turns out this idea of objects having a unique purpose is something that has kind of followed mankind through history. People kind. Terrible patriarchal language. Aristotle wrote about it. He called it hylomorphism. So there's your big ridiculous word for the day. And he meant the unity of an object and our perception of it. Ooh, that's pretty good. Sounds like a UXer wrote it. Hildegard von Bingen, who was a brilliant nun and scientist and composer, called it viriditas, meaning the vitality of things that are connected to their purpose. And the aesthetic writer and theorist William Hogarth called it fitness, an object's fit to its unique function. So what does this mean? If we say every element in a design system has a soul. Let's look at what that might be. So for example, I'm going to talk about Trivium. This is my shameless plug. So this is a time lapse of Trivium's evolution over the last 8 years. I've been working on it off and on since 2011. And initially, I would redesign Trivium based on my own personal taste. I would just do whatever I thought was cool looking. And then later, I instrumented the platform and began making redesigns based on a whole slew of engagement metrics, as you do proper data-driven design. But I realized I was missing out on something. I was designing based on data. I was not designing the experience that I wanted people to have. I wasn't understanding and serving the soul of the ecosystem of Trivium. So I created a soul-focused design system. I started with the principles. These are them: shared diversity, design for exploration, deliver a tangible experience, and keep it interesting at all costs. So here's an example. Here's an example of how a good principle, because I think that these are pretty good principles, a good principle can force change on a design, even sometimes against convention. So this was the artwork detail page for Trivium. Pretty classic stuff, plenty of white space. You've got your relevant meta above the fold. Click to zoom, scroll for more details. Turns out that this is pretty much the convention across the field. The Met, the MoMA, Google Arts and Culture, everybody kind of has this layout. But does it deliver a tangible experience? Because tangible is super tough online. It means to touch. It means that things should be touchable, and we're talking about pictures of artwork. So what does it mean to create a tangible experience? Hi. This is Emperor Pius, by the way. You can see each hair in his eyebrows. So basically what we did, it's a very simple change. We just blew the images up. We just made them super big. So now when you go to Trivium, you just have to reckon with this artwork. It's just right up in your face. You've got to scroll to see the whole damn thing. The details are just jumping out at you. It's a very different feel, even though it's not that difficult from a code perspective. The experience feels different. And if you keep scrolling, you get back to your overview. I'm not going to take the overview away. And in fact, we added the silhouette. So we scale it based on the height of the object so that you get a sense for what it would feel like to stand in front of this artwork and look into Emperor Pius's kind and tired eyes. But it's not just principles that state the soul of a system. According to Leibniz, everything has a soul, and that includes typefaces. So when doing this rework on Trivium, I asked, all right, what is the soul of the typeface of Trivium? What is its unique purpose? And I came up with this: foster contemplation and reference history. There's not a lot of places online where you can contemplate. So in 2017, I was using a typeface called mFred, which is awesome. It's super bold, it looks great on screen, and you can punch it out of an image with white. I mean, it's so nice. But it doesn't really feel all that contemplative, does it? It was fighting with the artwork. It was taking up too much space. So after reviewing the statement of intent, I realized I had to use something more like Optima. Optima's a very quiet face. It leaves a lot of room, plenty of letter spacing, and it was designed by Hermann Zanf after being inspired by the Roman inscriptions in the Basilica di Santa Croce. So it's got a fantastic lineage. All right, let's walk this all the way out. Is it overkill to give a drop-down menu a soul? Probably. But here's what happens if you do. This is a screenshot of the Trivium sticker sheet. I use this when I'm building new experiences. If you zoom in, you see that every component has a statement of intent at the top. So a summary's statement of intent might be to pique your interest. Body copy is intended to help you deep dive into written content, and even the humble related content link gets a soul, and that is to offer you an opportunity to continue your journey. And this super fun thing happens when you do this. You can use those statements of intent in your code. So I rewrote my functions to, rather than call the name of the object, to call its intent. And what this does is it turns your code, I know it's PHP, I apologize, but it turns your code into a user story. So this is the code for my artist biography page, basically. And it leads off with provoke curiosity. That's a specific style of header. Then pique interest, summary, dive into content, explore images, and then finally continue the journey. What I like about this, aside from being just massively UX navel-gazy, is that it forces me to be very intentional with the work. Every component does have to be unique because it has to have a unique place in the story and it has to move the story forward. And the placement of those components also needs to be intentional because a user will walk through this experience, start to finish, because we make them scroll so damn much. So that's that. These are my 4 recommendations for design system practices. Create actionable principles, edit, get feedback, and find the souls in your design system. Thank y'all.